I was 9 years old when I came home from school and my mother was gone. Not gone the way she'd been gone for 2 years already, not gone the way grief goes, slow and permanent and impossible to fully accept. Gone differently. Gone from the walls, gone from the shelves, gone from the mantel above the fireplace where her wedding photo had lived since before I was born. Every picture, every single one. I walked through the house room by room like I was taking inventory of a disaster. Kitchen, hallway, living room, the little frame on my dad's nightstand that had a photo of the three of us at the beach the summer I turned 5. All of it. Gone. I found my stepmother Carol in the kitchen making dinner. I stood in the doorway and I said, "Where are my mom's pictures?" She didn't turn around. She said, "I thought it would be healthier for everyone to move forward." I was 9 years old. I didn't know the word for what that was. I know it now. My name is Emily. I'm 34. I'm a high school history teacher in Michigan, which means I spend my days helping teenagers understand that the past is not decoration, that it shapes everything that comes after it, whether you acknowledge it or not. I think about that a lot, given my own history. My mother, Diane, died when I was 7. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed when I was 6, gone 14 months later. I have memories of her that are more feeling than image. The particular warmth of her, the way she smelled, the sound of her laugh, which was slightly too loud for polite company and completely wonderful. I have those. What I also had, for 2 years after she died, were the photographs. 30 or 40 of them distributed through the house. Her at various ages, her with my dad, her holding me as a baby with an expression of complete bewilderment that my dad said was because I'd been screaming for 6 hours and had just stopped. Her alive in every room. My dad, Frank, was a good man who was very bad at being alone. He met Carol at a work function when I was 8. They dated for 6 months, which, in retrospect, was not enough time for anyone involved to understand what they were getting into. And then Carol moved in, and they got married in a small ceremony that I attended in a dress I hated and smiled through, because that's what you do when you're 9 and the adults around you have made decisions. Carol was 41, had never been married, had no children, and had, I would learn over time, very specific ideas about what a home should look like and what role the past should play in it. Specifically, none. I don't think Carol was evil. I've had a long time to think about this, and what I've landed on is that she was deeply insecure and had no framework for existing in a house full of evidence that she was the second choice. She couldn't compete with a dead woman. Nobody can. And rather than sitting with that discomfort like an adult, she eliminated the evidence. She started with the photos. The night I found the pictures gone, my dad came home from work and I was sitting on the couch waiting for him. I had been sitting there for 2 hours. I hadn't touched my dinner. He walked in and saw my face and said, "What happened?" I said, "Mom's pictures are gone." He went still. Then he looked at Carol, who had come out of the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands and an expression I could only describe as braced. He said, "Carol." She said, "Frank, we talked about this. A fresh start." "We did not talk about this. I told you I was going to make some changes." "Not the photographs." His voice was low. That was not part of the conversation. She said, "It's not healthy for Emily to be surrounded by—" "Don't tell me what's healthy for my daughter." There was a silence, the kind that's louder than anything said. And then my dad said, quietly, "Where are they?" Carol said she'd boxed them up, put them in the garage. He nodded. He went to the garage. He came back with one photograph. Just one. The one from the mantel. He put it on the bookshelf in the living room. Just one. The others stayed in the box. And I understood, at 9 years old, something I didn't have the words for. That my dad had heard me and had not tried hard enough. That there were limits to how much he would fight for my mother's memory. That those limits had something to do with Carol standing in the kitchen with a dish towel and an expression I would see many times over the next 12 years. He didn't get the rest of the pictures back. He never did. That was the first lesson. There were many more. Carol operated in a register I came to think of as perfectly reasonable. Nothing she did was outrageous on its own. Everything was justifiable. The photographs were a fresh start. The way she answered for my dad in social situations was just trying to help. The way she redirected conversations away from my mother was moving forward. The way she redecorated the house, piece by piece, until almost nothing original remained, that was just making it her home. She was making it her home. In a house my mother had lived in. In a house I had lived in since birth. I went to my room a lot. I became a very good reader. At 13, I found the box of photographs in the garage. It was on a high shelf behind holiday decorations. I took it to my room and went through every single picture. I made a list of all the ones that existed, like I was cataloging an archive. I took photos of the photos with a disposable camera I'd bought with my allowance. I still have that roll of film, developed. It lives in a shoebox under my bed. My dad and I had a particular way of existing together through those years. We were close, but around Carol. Like we'd both learned to orbit the same space without discussing the gravitational force at its center. He came to my school things. He helped me with homework. He was present in the ways that registered as present. But when Carol was in the room, something in him shifted. A slight softening, a slight shrinking. The particular posture of a man who has decided that keeping the peace is worth almost any price. I watched him pay that price for 12 years. The things I could never say to her because he was in the room. The times I tried anyway and watched his face do that thing, that slight wince, that almost imperceptible brace, as he prepared to smooth it over. At 15, Carol, can we put some of my mom's pictures back up? In my room at least? Carol, Emily, I think you'd feel better if you focused on the present. My dad, from across the room. Maybe just in your room. It could be okay. Carol, Frank. Just his name. Just like that. And he stopped. At 17, when I was applying to colleges and the counselor asked me to write about someone who'd influenced me, and I wrote about my mother. Carol read it. She'd asked to read my essays. I don't know why I let her. And said, "Don't you think this is a little heavy? Admissions officers want to see resilience, not dwelling." I said, "Writing about my dead mother is dwelling?" My dad said, "She doesn't mean it like that, Emily." "How does she mean it, Dad? Can you explain it to me?" He couldn't. I sent the essay as written. I got into my first choice school. Carol did not mention it. The leaving for college was the best and worst thing. Best because I could breathe for the first time in 9 years. I could put my mother's photographs on my dorm room walls and look at them every day without anyone telling me it wasn't healthy. Worst because leaving meant my dad was alone with Carol, and something in me, the 9-year-old who'd sat on the couch waiting for him, kept worrying about what that meant. I came home for holidays. I kept my visits short. I was polite to Carol in the way that cost something every single time. the particular tax of being civil to someone you've never forgiven. My dad and I would find moments alone, a walk, a drive to pick something up, and in those moments, he was more himself. We could talk. He'd ask about my life, really ask, and listen. He'd mention my mother occasionally, small things, not big ones. The way she'd loved a particular song, something funny she'd said once. "You can talk about her more, you know," I said once on one of those drives. "To me, I like it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." He didn't say why he didn't. We both knew why. Dad called me on a Tuesday in March, 3 years ago. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you hear it from anyone else." I sat down. "They found something," he said, "on a scan, in my liver. Liver cancer. Caught at stage 2, which the doctors said was the better of the bad options. Treatment was possible. The prognosis was not what you wanted, but not what you feared most." I drove home that weekend. I sat across from him at the kitchen table. Carol was out, which felt deliberate, like he'd arranged it, and he looked older than I'd been tracking. The way people age in increments you miss when you're not watching closely. He said, "I've been thinking about some things." "Okay," I said. "About how I've handled certain things over the years." He was looking at his hands. My dad, who could look anyone in the eye in any situation, was looking at his hands. "I think I let you down, Emily. In ways I told myself were small. They weren't small." I didn't say anything. I was afraid of what would happen if I spoke. "The photographs," he said. "That was the first one. And He stopped. Started again. "She was your mother. She was in every room of that house, and I let her get packed into a box in the garage, and I told myself it was keeping the peace, and it wasn't. It was cowardice." That word. His word, not mine. Cowardice. I had thought it many times. I had never expected to hear him say it. "I'm sorry," he said, "for that, and for the years of it. All the times I didn't push back when I should have. All the times Carol said something and I translated it instead of correcting it." He looked up at me then. "You deserved better. From me. Not from her. I know what she is. From me." I sat there for a long time. Then I said, "I know you know that." I needed to say it out loud. "I know." We sat at that table for another hour. He told me things about my mother I hadn't known. Stories from before I was born. The first apartment they'd had together. The way she'd laughed at her own jokes before the punchline. The small inventory of a person. The things that don't make it into obituaries. I recorded it on my phone. I told him I was doing it. He said, "Good." I want to be honest about what happened next because it isn't a neat story. There was no dramatic confrontation. There was no moment where Carol stood in a room and was exposed and felt the full weight of what she'd done. What happened was quieter, and in some ways more complete. When Dad got sick, he needed help. Real help. Driving to appointments, managing medications, being present in the way that Carol, I discovered, was not particularly equipped to be. She was uncomfortable with illness. She managed from a distance. She organized things, made schedules, kept the logistics running. But the sitting with him, the being there in the room, that fell to me. I took leave from my teaching job for a semester. I moved back into my childhood home, into my old room, which Carol had redecorated twice, and which contained nothing of my original life. And I was there every day. And something happened in that house that I hadn't expected. My dad started talking about my mother. Not just to me, privately. Aloud. In rooms where Carol could hear. He'd mention her name in conversation, without the careful evasion he'd always used. He put a photograph, not just one, several, on the bookshelf in the living room. Carol said, the first time she noticed, "Frank, are you sure?" He said, "Yes." Just that. Just yes. I watched her face, and what I saw there wasn't the braced expression I'd grown up with, the "I'm managing this" expression. It was something more like uncertainty, like the particular disorientation of someone who has relied on a dynamic for years and found it suddenly changed. She didn't fight it. I think she understood, somewhere, that the illness had shifted something, and that fighting it would cost her more than letting it be. My dad finished treatment 8 months later. The cancer responded. He's been clear for 2 years now, and he goes for scans every 6 months, and every time I hold my breath until he calls. Carol is still there. I want to be truthful about this. She didn't leave. My dad didn't leave her. The marriage continues. She is different with him now, in ways I can see but can't fully explain. Less territorial, less certain of the ground she's standing on. She has never apologized to me. I've stopped waiting for it. What I have instead is this: my father's voice on a recording on my phone, telling me about my mother. An hour and 40 minutes of stories I didn't know. The first apartment, the laugh, the way she burned toast every single time and acted surprised every single time. I have the shoebox of developed photographs. And I have my dad, alive, in remission, who calls me every Sunday and sometimes, when the moment is right, says her name. That's not nothing. That's quite a lot, actually. I teach history, which means I believe certain things professionally that I've also had to learn personally. The past doesn't disappear because you remove its evidence. It doesn't stop shaping you because someone decided it should. Carol put my mother in a box in the garage when I was 9 years old, and my mother has been in every room of my life ever since. In the way I teach, in the questions I ask, in the particular laugh I apparently inherited that is slightly too loud for polite company. You can't delete a person from a child's history. You can make the child carry it alone. That's a different thing. I named my classroom library after my mom. Just a small thing, a sign above the bookshelves, Diane's Corner, with a brief note about why. My students don't know the story behind it. They just know it's a good place to find a book. She was a librarian. I don't know if I mentioned that. She would have liked the sign. My dad came to visit me at school last spring, one of those rare days when the schedule worked out. He stood in my classroom after the students had left, and he looked at the sign above the bookshelves. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "She'd have loved this." I said, "I know." He nodded. We stood there for a while, the two of us, in a room with her name on the wall. It wasn't everything. It was enough. Before you leave, I want to ask you something. Think about the things in your life that someone tried to take from you by removing the evidence. The memories someone told you weren't healthy. The name that went unspoken because someone else found it inconvenient. The photographs in the box. Here's what I've learned. The people who try to erase the past are afraid of it. They believe that if they remove what they can see, they remove what's there. They're wrong. The past lives in you. In the laugh you inherited. In the way you burn toast. In the questions you ask and the things you reach for. and the person you became because of who came before you. Nobody puts that in a box. Honor the people who made you, out loud, with their names, in rooms where anyone can hear. That's the only answer to erasure that matters.